If you've ever seen a great looking website and you thought, hey, I would love to make something like that, well, guess what? You can. The journey to becoming a web developer starts with a fundamental building block, HTML, which you will learn in this crash course. Welcome, I'm Estefania, and together we will dive into the fundamentals of HTML. This will be your first step into the world of web development. You will learn the secrets behind HTML, the language that defines the structure of every website that you've visited, ever. We will see the most important HTML tags and what they are used for, like headings, paragraphs, lists, links, images, and more. And by the end, you will be ready to take more advanced courses or even dive into CSS, which should be your next step. Always remember that you can do it. You can do it. Never doubt yourself. If you set a goal and you work hard to reach it, you will succeed. And you do have what it takes to become a web developer. If you decided to take this course, then you are interested. You can work hard and you can reach your goal. I'm here to help you with that. If you're ready, let's begin. And let's start talking about HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is like the fundamental building block of the entire web as we know it today. It's essential. And when you write your HTML file, you will be writing it in a specific type of file called an HTML file. Just like we have file extensions for, let's say, Word documents or video files, we also have an extension for HTML files. HTML works hand in hand. It works very closely with CSS and JavaScript. You can think of these as the three most important pillars of web development. Each one has its own role in making the web the amazing tool that it is today. HTML creates the structure of the website. If we have an analogy, we could think of it as building a house. HTML would be all the internal structure of the house, the blueprint, how we are creating the rooms, the layout, the bathrooms, everything that we need for the house. This would be like an example. You would have a plain structure with no style applied to it yet. You just define what you want to show and where it should be. Like here we have these shapes inside the rectangle. So we know that we will have three elements inside another element. That is what HTML basically defines. It's like the architect of the entire website. However, when you do want to add style and the finishing touches, you will go to CSS. CSS is also super important and you will learn it. This should be your next step after taking this course. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. A style sheet is what is going to add style to your website. With the house analogy, that would be like putting the finishing touches on the house and actually decorating it, painting the walls, and making it look nice. And finally, JavaScript is another fundamental pillar, but it is something a little bit more advanced than HTML and CSS. It's a programming language. It's a programming language in the full sense of the word. In the house analogy, that would be like when you have the finished house and you add plumbing, the electricity, everything that you need to make the house functional. JavaScript adds functionality to your website and interactivity. So once you have these three pillars, the structure, the style, and the functionality, the website comes to life. However, some websites don't use JavaScript. They don't need JavaScript. They only need HTML and CSS. Why? These types of websites that don't have any interactivity are called static websites. Static is exactly the word that we need to describe them. They are static. They don't move. They don't do anything. They're not interactive. They just show you the content and they will be exactly the same every time you go to them. Like, for example, a blog. When you're reading an article, the article doesn't actually interact with you. It just presents the text, you read it, and that's it. However, if you do add JavaScript to the website and you want to add some more advanced functionality and interactivity, like for example an e-commerce website or a video streaming application or an online game, that will need HTML to add that interactivity. And those types of websites are what we call dynamic. Why? Because JavaScript will make them dynamic. The content will change or will be modified based on how the user interacts with the different elements that we have there, like buttons, search fields, forms, and different elements that we can add, and that the browser, the specialized tool that we use for actually rendering and accessing websites, will interpret and it will work to add that interactivity. Great, so now that you know more about these three main pillars of web development, let's dive into the building blocks, because HTML is the fundamental building block. Every single website, whether it's static or dynamic, will need HTML. And what are the actual building blocks of HTML? Yes, we can further subdivide this and find things that are at the core of web development. These concepts are elements and tags. They are fundamental, and you can think of them as the foundations of the house. Elements and tags are the elements that we use every single day when we work with HTML. HTML elements are the building blocks of an HTML file. They represent what we can add to our website. And we are the ones who need to choose how to use them and how to combine them to create the website that we envision. For example, we can have an image element, a text element, a link to an internal page of our website or to other websites, or containers. We can also have elements that contain other elements to create more complex structures. And that's how we structure the complex and nice looking websites that we can see today. This is an example of an HTML element. You can see that it has a very specific syntax, a way of writing that specific structure within the HTML file. We already saw the concept of an element, and now with this example we're going to see the concept of a tag, because they are closely related. We define elements with the corresponding tags. These are the tags. Here we have specifically a P element, a paragraph element, which is standard in HTML. We can use that to create paragraphs. The tags are a way of actually telling the browser what type of HTML element we want to create there. And the tags have a specific syntax. We enclose the type of element with angle brackets. We have the opening angle bracket and we have the closing angle bracket. And inside those tags, we see the content of the element. In this case, hello world, which would be text, the text of the paragraph. We have many different types of elements that we can add to our HTML file. For example, body, which is like the main container for everything on our website, and we will talk about this in just a few moments during the course. We have an image element used for, yes, you guessed it, for images. We also have this OL, which is for ordered lists of items, and we have divs, and many different elements that we can add. This is just like a subset, a few examples that I threw here on the slide to show you the diverse range of elements that we can add. Divs are very important and very frequently used, and we will talk about them more during the course. You might have noticed that we have two tags over here, but what are their purposes and why are they different? Well, this is the opening tag of the paragraph element. Some elements have an opening tag and a closing tag. These tags are super important for telling the browser where the element starts and where it ends. This way, we are enclosing the content that it contains. So the browser knows where to start, where to end, and what it contains. And this is how it creates something called a DOM tree. This is like a more advanced concept, but just know that the browser gradually creates something like a tree with all the structure of the website, the elements and their content. The opening tag has a specific syntax. We have angle brackets, and within the angle brackets, the type of HTML element. And in the closing tag, we see the same angle brackets, but you will also find the /. This / is very important because it differentiates the opening tag from the closing tag, and it basically tells the browser, hey, here I am just closing the element, please close it, I'm going to start a new one. This is like the stop sign. And here we have the content. The content could be text or it could be other elements, and this is super important for creating more complex structures. We can have, for example, images within paragraphs or images within links, and you can combine them to create complex structures. However, not all the HTML elements have two tags, and this is what we call void elements. Basically, they do not have any content. So they're not like a paragraph or a div that can have content between the two tags. So really there isn't a need for an opening and a closing tag. We can write all the information we need in just one tag. Let me show you an example. Here we have an image tag. Basically, we can describe everything we need for an image just with one tag in the opening tag. And you can see here that we are adding this slash, this forward slash, to close the tag. However, we can omit it because really in HTML, this slash is just omitted, it's just ignored when the browser actually renders the website. You should only add this if you want to make your HTML file compatible with XHTML, which is like a stricter version of HTML, but usually you can omit it. So you would have something like this, with the opening angle bracket and the closing angle bracket. This is what we usually refer to as a self-closing tag, and you will see this term being used very frequently in the context of HTML. However, technically, in the strict meaning of the word, in HTML, we do not have a self-closing tag. That is according to the documentation that we have over here. They do not exist in HTML, we just write them if we want to make them compatible with XHTML or other formats. So usually you will see me and other developers and real-world projects writing them like this, without the forward slash at the end. And that's basically how void elements work. We will see some examples of void elements during the course. All of these elements help us to create that more complex website structure. And another key thing that lets us create that complex structure is that we can add elements within other elements to define the structure of the website. This is what we call nesting in HTML and basically in other programming languages as well. And I don't mean this type of nesting, it's actually having an element within another element within another element. This is super important because let's see this example. We have an A element, which in HTML represents a link. And within that A element, the main element, you can see that here we have the opening tag and we have the closing tag. So this element has not ended or has not been closed before we get to the other element. But this element is fully contained within the A because we have the opening tag and we have the closing tag. We have the paragraph entirely here, and we have the image here. And then, and only then, after we create these elements, we close the A tag, we close the A element. This is telling the browser that we want to nest the elements inside the A element. So the link will contain two elements. This is like a fundamental concept and idea and notion that you will need to master and handle to actually understand how HTML works. We are creating this nested structure, and this will be super helpful later for working with the elements, for manipulating them with JavaScript, and for assigning style with CSS. Another key thing that you should know is that this space that we are keeping here is not there just for decoration purposes. It's actually something that is highly recommended. This is called indentation. Indentation is a concept that is actually relevant for HTML and beyond, for other programming languages like JavaScript, like Python, even in CSS, indentation is important. Let's see why. Indentation is that extra space to the left that we add in our code or in our structure to visualize the structure of the website more easily. In HTML, indentation is actually optional, but it is highly recommended, and this is something that I would like to emphasize because this is a best practice, and it's something that you should get familiar with from the start. Because you will find it in every project, and basically your HTML will not follow the guidelines if you don't include the indentation. If you don't include it, you will still see the same result in the browser. But when you or other developers read your file, they will not understand it so easily. In HTML, we usually use 2 spaces per level. Some programming languages use 4, but in HTML and CSS, usually you will find 2 spaces per level. Here, we are using 2 spaces. So relative to this main element, we add 2 spaces here, and that's where we start writing the other element after the 2 spaces. This creates that structure that is easier to understand. We know that these 2 elements are within the A element. And you will see that as the code or the structure gets more complex, it will be easier to understand thanks to indentation. Great, so now that you know more about HTML and the theoretical foundations, let's dive into the practice. We will be writing our HTML file in something that we call a code editor. A code editor is just a tool where we can write our code, work with our files, and in some cases, depending on the programming language that we're using, we can also run our code there. In this case, I will be working with Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a free code editor that you can download. It's by Microsoft, it's made by Microsoft, and it has a version for macOS and a version for Windows and a version for Linux. So you can use it regardless of your operating system. It's super powerful and it has many different features that you may like to try as you dive deeper into web development. Actually, I have a full course on Visual Studio Code. In case you want to learn more about it, I will include a link in the description below. It's an online course, it's an 8-hour course where you can master the features of this code editor, and I promise you that this will be very helpful for you for any programming language or task that you want to tackle in the future. So now that we have Visual Studio Code installed, to install it you just download it here and then you follow the instructions. Once you have it installed, we will see something like this. Here, if we click here on these icons, we will see the Explorer. In the Explorer, you can see that I have the Coding with Estefania folder already opened. To open a folder, you just go to File, Open Folder, you select the folder that you want to open, and that is what you will see over here. You will see the name of your folder here. And inside the Explorer, you can right-click to create a new file. So let's do this. We're going to create a new file, and immediately you will see this text input field. Here you can write the name of your file and include the extension. In this case, it's an HTML file, so we're going to write .html, and you will see how this little icon changes. This is the icon that you will see by default for HTML files. For other types of files, you may see different icons like CSS. You can see that the icon changed, or Python, or JavaScript. But now we're going to work with HTML. Awesome. So here, you may see some differences compared to your version of Visual Studio Code or your current configuration, because here you have a custom color theme and some custom settings, okay? So if you don't see any particular tools that you do see on your code editor, it might be because of that. Here we have the line number, and we can start writing our HTML. This is the code editor area where we can actually work on our file. If we double click on this file that we just opened, we will be opening our file. Like this, you need to double click it, because if you only click once, you will be entering a preview. And you can see this here because the name is in italics. If you double click on it, this will be opened permanently. Right now, it's empty. We are adding some blank lines. You can see the numbers over here. So let's fill them with the content of our HTML file. When you start writing your HTML file, the first thing that you're going to write, or the first thing that you will see when you open an HTML file, will be this line. This is the DOCTYPE Declaration. You will see the angle brackets, and inside you see the exclamation mark, DOCTYPE in uppercase, and HTML. What is the DOCTYPE? It's basically the first line. It describes the version of HTML that will be used throughout the file. So when you write it as the first line in your file, you're going to tell the browser, hey, I'm going to use the latest version of HTML. Or you also have the option to specify a different version, but usually we use the latest one, which is HTML5. This is the first line of your HTML file. This should be the first line that you write in every HTML file. And that's the purpose of the doc type. You always need to write it as your first line. Then, after the doc type, we find another element which is key for HTML files, the HTML element. Yeah, that's not so surprising. The HTML file has the HTML element. It's the main element that should contain the entire website. Like everything else that you're going to write should be inside this element, the HTML element. If we have an HTML file, we would have the doc type, and then we would write the HTML element with the opening tag here and the closing tag here, and then everything else that we're going to write in the middle. Okay, that's super important. So now let's add our HTML tag. This HTML tag that we have over here. The HTML tag should contain everything on your website. You just write the opening angle bracket followed by HTML, the name of the tag, and then you close the angle bracket. And by default, you should see the closing tag auto-completing. That is another great thing about Visual Studio Code, that the tags will be auto-completed. In other tools, you may not have this feature and you will need to write it manually. But no worries, you can always write it manually. Just add the / over here, and then you press enter to create a space between the opening and closing tags so we can actually continue adding elements to this structure. Usually it's good not to keep too many blank lines below the end, so I'm going to just keep one line here. And I'm going to use 2 spaces for indentation. Right now, by default, in Visual Studio Code, you will see 4 over here in the status bar, this bar that we have here at the bottom. If we click here on spaces, and then we say indent using spaces, and then we select 2, we will be changing those 4 spaces by default to 2. Usually in HTML we use 2 spaces. So now if I press the tab key, I will be adding 2 spaces. You can see these 2 little dots over here. And I can just start writing the internal structure of the website. In the HTML tag, you can add something called an attribute. An attribute is just a way of specifying something about your element, a characteristic. If our web page is going to be mostly in English, then we can write this attribute to tell the browser that we're going to have content in English. This is the language attribute, and this is the English value. You have to surround the value with double quotes and write it in the opening tag. You can always add this attribute later, but it's always recommended to specify the language. For now, let's see what this looks like in the browser if we open the HTML file in the browser. I personally have an extension, which is something that you can add to Visual Studio Code to make your life much easier. They're very helpful tools and they are free to add, free to install. This extension, which you can find over here in the extensions panel, in the extensions marketplace, is called Live Server. Live Server will basically allow you to see your website or web application live on the browser and reload any changes automatically without you having to reload them manually in the browser. It's super helpful. I already have it installed, and to install it you just go here, you search for Live Server, you click here, and you should see an install button. You click on the install button and that should install it without any issues. And then you should see something like this over here in the status bar, Go Live. This is the button that will start all the magic, because when you are in your HTML file, you can click on this button to start a server and actually see your website live. But don't worry, you will only see it yourself. It's not actually public yet anywhere online. This is just for your development purposes and to actually see what the website looks like as you build it and as you make changes to it. It's super helpful, and I highly recommend installing Live Server if you're planning to have a career or to continue working in web development. You will see something like this. the live server extension will open your website by default here. This is the default local IP address of your machine, so it's basically telling you that it is running inside your machine. This is the port, which is like a number that we use to identify the process in the browser, and we are in the index.html file. Right now you don't see anything, but that is what we expect because we currently have nothing in the structure of our website. If we go here, we even see an error that says that live reload is not possible without a head or a body tag. Those are two tags that we need to add here inside HTML, and we will see them in just a moment. But before we do that, let's talk about very helpful tools that you will use every day as a web developer, and they come included with Google Chrome. I will show you how they work. Right now we only see a blank screen, right? Because we don't have anything. But we actually do have something. If we right click here anywhere on the blank space and we click on inspect, this works for Windows and for macOS, we will open these tools which are called the Chrome Developer Tools. They were created exactly for you, for developers in mind, and they are super helpful for web development. You can see that the file actually has something. This is the structure of our HTML. We see the doc type, which is not actually displayed, but it is there. We see our HTML tag with the language in English. And we see head and body, which are added automatically to actually be able to render them in the browser. We don't have them in the file, but we do have them here because the browser adds them automatically if we don't. But these Chrome Developer Tools are super helpful, and as you dive deeper into them, you will see how you can use their power to preview your websites and do many different things with them. After we have the HTML tags, we need to add two elements, head and body. Head also has an opening tag and a closing tag, and notice that here in the closing tag we also have the /. The head element is the element that contains the title and the metadata of the website. Basically everything that will be handled behind the scenes. The only thing that will actually be visible from the head element will be the title, which is like that short title that you can see on the browser tab when you access the website. It's very nice, and I highly recommend customizing it for every website that you create. We will see how you can do that. And the head element also contains the metadata of the website, which is like additional information for search engine optimization and things that you can find behind the scenes. Like, for example, character encoding, characters from other languages or emojis, how are they going to be encoded to be displayed correctly on the browser, the author, and specific keywords for search engine optimization, loading external resources like external style sheets or frameworks, and more. Head is like the manager of everything that happens behind the scenes. We write it over here. Within HTML, the first thing that we usually write is head. And then everything inside head is inside these two tags. And then after head, we usually write the body tag. If head runs everything behind the scenes, then body runs everything on the center stage. Because everything that you write within body will be visible to the user on the browser. The body element is the element that contains all the content that will define the visible structure of the website. So if we have an HTML file like this one, we have the doc type HTML head, then after head, notice that this is after head, not inside head. We already closed head over here. We find body, and then everything inside body will be visible. This is what we actually see on the browser, and here is everything behind the scenes. Now let's actually add our head tag. Remember that the process is exactly the same for every element in the HTML file. We write the opening tag. The code editor may autocomplete this, so you may have this automatically. If not, you will need to write it with the / before the name. And then you will press enter, and if you need to add some content here between the tags, you just add another level of indentation, 2 spaces. and you continue the process creating that nested structure. Remember that we just talked about the content of head, and head stores metadata, behind the scenes information about the website. For example, the title. It's basically the little title that you can see in the browser tab when you access a website. Let me show you something like this. Let me show you. If you go to Wikipedia's main page, for example, you will see this. This, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, is the title of this web page. This is included in the title element of the head tag of this website. And now, since we are in Wikipedia, let me show you how inspect works in a real website. You can see here that we have a much more elaborate and complex HTML file. But this is an example of what you will actually see in a real live website. And by the end of the course, you will understand many of these concepts and how they work. But just know that this is the type of structure that you will be creating. You can identify the elements that we've talked about so far, like head, body, and HTML. And some new elements that we will talk about in the course, like divs, elements, which are links, and many other elements that you may find in real-world websites. Great, so now that we cleared that up, the head and the title, let's write the actual title of our website. It's going to be a generic title for the purpose of this demo. We're going to call it My Website. We write the content of the title inside the tags, within the opening and closing tags. And we usually don't include spaces like this. We just write the content directly or immediately after and before the tags. We don't include the spaces. And to be able to reload the website automatically, we do need to include head and body in our file. So I'm gonna do that even if body is empty at the moment. We're just going to see how the title is reflected in the browser. So let's go back to Chrome. And now you can see this. If I close the developer tools on the X, you can see this title, My Website. Awesome, right? In head, you can also customize this little icon over here, which is by default like a small globe, but you can change this, and this is called a fab icon. You can customize the fab icon as well as the title, which is always a nice detail. Every live website that you will see out there will have these two values customized. Stay tuned for how to customize the fab icon, and that is something that we will see in an upcoming video. Great, so after we have the head element, now we go to the body. Body is the element that has all the content of the website, right? If it's empty, the website is basically empty in the browser. Everything that we write anywhere else in our file will not be visible except these two little details of the title and the fab icon. That's why we see the empty website over here. Now let's talk about specific HTML elements and how they work. First, we start with headings. Headings are elements that let us create a structure of headings and their hierarchy. We just need to write their opening and closing tags. We see H1 up to H6, and in terms of their hierarchy, H1 would be higher in the hierarchy and H6 would be lower in the hierarchy. Usually, they are also represented in a different format, with H1 being a larger font and H6 being a smaller font. But you should never use these tags to actually style the headings or choose a specific size. You should choose them based on their priority and the structure of the text, and then style them with CSS. Let's add a level 1 heading over here. And I'm going to call this heading 1 just to associate that with the corresponding tag. This could be any heading that you need. For example, if you're writing a blog post or if you're writing a website with different levels of headings, then you could just write the text over here. If we go to the browser again, we can see this, heading 1. If we inspect this in the Chrome Developer Tools by right-clicking on it and clicking on Inspect, we will go directly to that element in Chrome Developer Tools. We see HTML, we see head, and now we have the title over here like we did before, but the actual visible part of the website is within body. If you click here on these arrows, you will be collapsing or expanding the content of an element. Remember that concept of nesting elements? So yes, well, it is very important for creating that structure. And these little arrows are essential for actually navigating the structure of the website. If we expand body here in the tools, we can see that it contains a heading. The heading 1 is within an h1 tag. And in the Chrome Developer Tools, it's also awesome that we can actually modify the content of the website. If we want to change this text, we just double click on it and we see my demo heading. This is a preview, however, this is not making any changes to the actual file. If we just reload this by clicking here, we go back to the content of the file. Making any changes here in the Developer Tools is helpful to actually preview those changes, then you can go back to your file and implement them. But it's just a quick way of previewing your changes, what you're planning to make. Great, so this is heading 1. Remember that we have headings up till level 6, and they are like in a hierarchy. And they will have a format by default. I will show you that in just a moment. Let me just write the headings. Heading 6. Over here we have the 6 levels of heading. And here you can see it. Here in the Chrome Developer Tools we can see these 6 elements, but I'm going to zoom in so we can see them a bit bigger, a bit larger by clicking here on the 3 dots on the additional options, and here I'm going to zoom in so you can see that better in the video. Okay, if you're in 100%, that will be the zoom for 100%. I'm going to zoom in to 250%. So we can see the styles for the different headings. This creates the heading hierarchy. You should only have one H1 heading per page. Okay, so this should be like the main heading, and then you can have multiple H2 headings and multiple H3 headings and so on, if they are in the same level of the hierarchy. But only one H1 heading is recommended. And you can see that their font size is going from the larger one to the smallest one. And that is also creating a hierarchy visually. But you shouldn't use these tags to only create the visual hierarchy, okay? So if you want to make the text larger, you can also use CSS. The tags are actually meant for creating the hierarchy in the website structure, not only visually. Okay? So the headings are very helpful. They're like the first elements that we learn when we start learning HTML. Another element that is super common and that we use all the time in HTML is the P element, the paragraph. This is used for actually defining a paragraph or a block or a sentence of text. Let's say that I'm learning HTML. This will be my paragraph. Of course, it could be longer than this. This is just a sentence, but it could have multiple lines and it would still be wrapped in the P tag. And you can have multiple P tags, P elements, multiple paragraphs, and they would be separated into different paragraphs. Let's go to the browser. And now I'm going to reload this. Sometimes you may need to reload it. And you can see that I'm learning HTML. This is of course larger than what you will see because I am zooming in. By default, this would be 100% if I don't apply any style to the text, but for that we have CSS. I'm going to be zooming in so you can see this better. And if we inspect it here, you just need to place your cursor on top of that, right click, and then select Inspect. That will take you to the tools and select it immediately. Then we go to divs. Divs are extremely important. They are general purpose containers that you can use to create the structure of your website. The name div comes from the concept of a divider. It's like a general purpose container. This is the key here in this concept, general purpose. When you think of a div, you should think of general purpose. It's like a box. You can think of them as a box. A box with no labels on it, and you can store anything inside them. They're not specific. They're not like image tags or list tags like ordered lists or unordered lists. They are not specific for any type of content. They can store anything. However, it's not actually recommended to use divs very frequently, like in a high ratio in your HTML structure. because they are general, so they are not giving us as much information about the structure of the website as we need to. It is usually recommended to use Semantic HTML whenever possible instead of divs. What is Semantic HTML? Semantic HTML is a practice of using more specific and descriptive HTML tags to define the structure of the website. Remember that divs are general. Here we're doing the opposite. We're choosing specific tags for the content or for the role that they have in the website. Instead of writing something like this, which is not giving us much information, we write something more specific, like header, like main, which stores the main content of the website, the footer, which stores like the footer of the page with the links and the contact information, or nav, to represent the navigation bar. This is highly recommended, much more descriptive, and it will help you with search engine optimization and overall with screen readers. Great! Now let's talk about the div. For example, here in the Wikipedia landing page, in English here, we're going to inspect the website and I will show you that we have many div tags over here. So Wikipedia is using many divs. This is helpful when you just want to have a general purpose container and you don't have any other semantic tags that could replace it, that could be more descriptive. So this is a div used in a real-world project. Awesome, right? Inside the div, you can write basically anything you need. Let's say that we want to have 2 paragraphs within the same div. I can just add them, and you can see how this indentation is helping us to see the hierarchy visually. And in Visual Studio Code, this is also helpful because we have these little arrows that we can use to collapse the element if we don't want to see its content. These little arrows to the right. They're also very helpful. Highly recommend using them. If we go to the browser, and now we see the 2 paragraphs, and now in the structure of the body, we see that we have a div. And within that div, we have the 2 paragraphs. This hierarchy and these containers will be super helpful for creating the layout of your website, how you want the website to look, because later on with CSS, we will apply styles, and we will be able to select the container and tell the browser how we want these elements to be displayed and where they should be located. So that's why we wrap the elements around divs to create this structure. Another important thing to mention is that in HTML, everything is a box. HTML has something called the box model, and we may dive deeper into this model in an upcoming video on the channel. It's a thorough topic to cover because it will be combined with CSS for you to fully understand the implications of the box model. But basically what you need to know is that the elements are always boxes or rectangles. Even if they are circular or they look circular, they will be surrounded by rectangles or squares. And that box will determine their height, width, and where they are located relative to other elements. That's basically the box model. They can also have margin and space inside the element called padding. This was a box model crash course, but stay tuned on the channel. I am planning to publish a video on the box model. Using divs is only recommended when you don't have a semantic tag that would be more descriptive. For example, let's say that I want to create a navigation bar, and I do that with a div. And then I want to create some links to my home, to the about page, or to the contact page. The navigation bar would be like the bar at the top where you have these links that take you to different pages of the website. The div is not actually telling us or the browser that this will be a navigation bar. It doesn't have a specific purpose. But if we can replace it with the nav tag, this will be much more descriptive and it will tell the browser that this is intended to be a navigation bar. That is the advantage of using Semantic HTML instead of a div, and it is highly recommended whenever possible. And now let's talk about something super important, HTML attributes. HTML attributes are super important because they are special words in the opening tag of an HTML element. that define additional information about that element. For example, if we are creating an image, where are we going to find that image in our file system? That is an attribute for the image. They are special words that we add to the opening tag. We always add them to the opening tag, never to the closing tag. And they will define additional information. Here we have an example with a link element, an A element. We see this attribute, because what happens if we don't specify where we want to go? If we just write A here without specifying where we want the link to go, then the link will not have any destination. It will not know exactly where we want to go. That's why we have this attribute, and that's why we can specify the value for that particular attribute. Really, the attribute is href. It's a special word that you will find in the documentation, and with practice you will know exactly what you need to use and what it is helpful for. But in this case, just know that href is the reference for the link. And we have the value itself, which is surrounded by quotation marks. We always see attributes in this format, in the opening tag. The name of the attribute followed by an equal sign, and then the value. We are assigning the value to the attribute. Great, and now let's talk about images. How can we create an image in our HTML? Well, here we see an example of an image tag. We don't have any content, so we are only going to have an opening tag. We see the angle brackets, and here we can see two attributes, source and alt. If we write multiple attributes on the same opening tag, we need to separate them with a space. And we can also divide them or write them in multiple lines if the opening tag gets too crowded or has too many attributes for readability purposes. Here in the source attribute, we are defining the path to the image file. This would be the relative path, relative to where we are storing our HTML file. Here we can write the name of the image or the file directly because we have the image at the same level as the HTML file. Else we would need to write the path, the relative path over here. And here we have another attribute which is super helpful for accessibility, the alt attribute. Accessibility is very important for web development and something that you should always keep in mind. It's a practice of trying to implement features for giving as many people as possible access to your website, regardless of their different needs that they may have, like if they are like hearing or speaking or using a mouse or a keyboard, different types of needs that your users may have, and making sure that your website works correctly for them, that they can access your content and having good user experience. In this case, the alt attribute is there to help people to know what the image is about. This text will be displayed when the image doesn't load because, for example, the internet connection failed at some point while the image was downloading, or it will be read out loud if the user is using a screen reader and cannot actually see what's in the image. So that's what the alt attribute is for. In an image tag, we may also choose to include the / at the end, but this is optional. Remember that this is a self-closing tag, so this is optional. We may choose to use it or we may omit it. Totally okay. You just need to be consistent. To create an image element, you just write the image tag like this. The image tag is a self-closing tag, so we don't need to have something like this, okay? This is not correct. But the image needs to know where it will take the image from, because if we go here to the browser, we see that we do have an image element here, but it's not actually showing anything because the image is not specified. I'm going to open the Explorer, and I'm going to create a new folder called Images. And inside that folder, I'm going to drag and drop an image from an image stock website. I'm just going to personally use Pixabay. You may choose a different one. They are free, they do not have any copyright issues. I'm going to save an image here in my folder, my Coding with Stephania folder that I have in my documents in my images folder. And I'm going to name it Koalas. Yes, I'm a huge fan of koalas. I think they're super, super cute. And we will be showing that image on our website. How can we write the path to our image here? We need to tell the browser where the image is located for the browser to find it and know where it is. Well, for that we use the source attribute, like we saw in the example. For that we will need to write the relative path to the image. If our HTML path is here, at the same level as our images folder, we will need to write images, the name of the folder, and then a forward slash, and the name of the file. The forward slash means that we're going to look for something that it's inside the images folder. And that something will be the koalas.jpg file. So I am going to write it over here. We can see that Visual Studio Code is auto-completing this as well, so that's helpful as well. It can save you time. And now if we go to the browser, we can see this, which is a very, very large image of a koala. Yeah, it is. It is the image that we are using, but by default, it will use the original dimensions. So if we want to customize that, we can also set a specific width, and that will introduce you to what we know as dimensions. Dimensions, like width and height, can be set in HTML, but usually we do that in CSS. Since we're not covering CSS in the course, I'm gonna do that directly here in HTML. A width, we can also set a height, but let's see if the width is enough to keep the aspect ratio. Here, look at it. It's so beautiful. I really love the baby koala. But it is working. We are keeping the same aspect ratio, so the image is not being distorted or stretched in any way because we just specified the width. It will apply that width and it will adjust the height to keep the same proportion. That's great. And if we inspect this image, we can see it over here. In the developer tools, we see image, source, images, koalas.jpg. We also see this image as an independent resource that we can find more information about. We see the rendered size and the intrinsic size, which is like the original size and what we are using for the website. We also see the aspect ratio, if we are keeping the same aspect ratio, the proportions of the width and height. We see the width, and basically we see all the information over here. The image is within the body, and we see that the body is this one over here, everything that is highlighted in orange. Great, we have the image, but again, we need something else. What do we need? Well, we need an alt attribute. It's a best practice in HTML to add an alt attribute to every single image that you add to your website, for accessibility purposes, for screen readers, and for people who may not be able to see the image, just to make your website accessible to everyone who may not see the image. In the alt attribute, we will need to describe the image, so I'm going to say a koala carrying her baby on her back. So I'm going to be very descriptive about the image, and I'm going to write it as if I could not see the image. How would I describe it? That's like my suggestion for writing the alt attributes. Here we can see that the alt attribute was added. So to check the alt attribute, let's do something just to simulate this. Instead of actually writing the path to the image, let's say that for some reason we had a typo or an error and we didn't actually find the image, so there was an error. You can see what this would look like. We would see the broken image icon that you may have seen before, and then we see the alt attribute, a koala carrying her baby on her back. That is exactly what someone with a screen reader would hear, or what someone with an unstable internet connection would see if the image is not loaded properly. So if you ever want to check this, just add a typo here so the image is not actually displayed, and you will see that in the preview. Awesome, considering accessibility is always a high priority. And now we go to comments. What are comments used for? A comment is an annotation that you can write in your code in human readable format. Super important, human readable format. Comments are meant for humans. It's like taking a notepad and adding a note to yourself, clarifying something, or adding a comment or something that you want to say at that point in your code or in your file. They're not actually part of the code, so they don't have any actual real effect in the output. You will not see them in the website. They're just there in the HTML file when you or other developers want to open the file and read it. They're supposed to be helpful. In this case, we can see this example for the comment, and this is a very generic comment. This is my comment, of course, this is not helpful at all, but this should be helpful for you and other developers. When we write a comment, our main goal is to add something, to say something that developers would not actually know or detect immediately when they are reading our file. Every programming language, or every language in this case, in HTML and CSS, we can also write comments. We have different ways of starting and ending comments. In HTML, we write the angle bracket, the exclamation mark, and 2 hyphens to start the comment. This is a very peculiar pattern, and at first you may have a hard time remembering this, but with practice I promise you that you will remember this. And you also have some keyboard shortcuts depending on your code editor to do this automatically, to comment out a line. This is how we start the comment. This will convert the entire line into a comment, so it will not be part of the code until we end the comment. And we need to end it with 2 hyphens and an angle bracket. And everything in between will be the comment. Usually we write a space before the content and after the content to separate it from the symbols. Let's write a comment in our file. Angle bracket, an exclamation mark, and then 2 hyphens. Visual Studio Code is auto-completing this to close the comment, but you may need to write it based on the tool that you're using. We have 2 hyphens and then the closing angle bracket. And inside that we will write our comment. Let's say that here below we have a sequence of images, image elements, and we want to be more specific about what those images represent. We could add a comment like this: portfolio image gallery, or we could add images of projects I've completed, or basically anything that we want to write here as a comment, and this will not be part of the code and it will not be in the output. Let me show you this. You can see that it is here, but it's not being displayed on the website. It's just part of the HTML file. They are super helpful and I highly recommend using them whenever possible. I usually use them to divide different sections or to add some clarifications of what the elements represent. But it's also important not to add obvious comments, so you wouldn't say this like, this is not something that you want to write 5 image elements. Because if we have 5 image elements here below, that would be like something obvious. You want to add something that is actually meaningful and helpful. It adds more information. And now let's go to our links. How can we add links in HTML with the A tag? You will also see something like this, a link element, but this is different. This is usually used in the head tag. It's not actually a link that you will click on. It's a link to a different or an external resource like a style sheet with CSS, or a JavaScript file, an external JavaScript file, or another resource that you're going to download from the internet, but it's usually something that we use behind the scenes. The link that we will actually click on and that will be visible on the website is the A element. This might be a bit confusing at first, but I promise you that you will remember this in no time. So here we have the A element, and let's say that I want to take my users to Wikipedia with this link. Inside the opening and closing tags, I write the text that will be displayed for the link. If I go to the browser, I see Wikipedia, but I do not really see it in a link format, right? That's because the element doesn't really have a destination, so it's not actually clickable yet. If we click on it, nothing happens. What we need to add is the destination. I'm going to go to Wikipedia and copy the URL here, and I'm going to paste it as the value of the href attribute, like this. Since these elements are getting a little bit too long on the same row, I'm going to wrap them so you can see everything better. To wrap them, to make them fit your current editor, you can use Option C. Option C on macOS, or that would be Alt C on Windows. This will basically just wrap the elements so you can see them better, adjust it to the width of your code editor based on the zoom that you currently have. That's very helpful in Visual Studio Code, and this may change depending on the tool that you're using. But if you're using Visual Studio Code, I highly recommend it. Unless you want everything to stay on the same row, this is not actually changing anything in the file. It's just a visual change, and it will go back to the same presentation if you zoom out. Okay, it's just for visual purposes. So here we have the source and we have Wikipedia. If we go to the browser again to our website, now we do see this. We do see the link, and if we click on it, we will go to Wikipedia. That's awesome, right? We do have, and that is the hypertext part of HTML. It's a special type of text that can also link us to other resources. However, the link is taking us to the website on the same page, so we're leaving our website and going to the next website. And that's usually not what we want. We want the user to stay on our website, right? So we can open this link in another tab. How can we do that? Well, we can add 2 more attributes. Let me show you. One of them is called target and the other one is called rel. It's also a standard to separate the attributes into multiple lines, and you can also set this up to be modified or to be styled automatically. So that's super helpful as well to avoid having very long lines when you have many different attributes. That will not change the output, but it will be easier to read. So we're adding the target attribute, which is blank. The value of this attribute is blank. Blank is telling the browser that we want to open the destination in a new tab. And this attribute is for security purposes to avoid any potential attacks made in the new tab. Great, so here we have Wikipedia text as well, and now if we go back to the browser and we click on this link, now we open the link in a new tab. Awesome, right? We're not opening it in the same tab, now we have a new tab. And that was all thanks to target blank. Great, so this is basically how links work. You can customize their style with CSS, but that is the topic of another course. Here we're focusing on HTML. And in HTML, we also have lists. Lists are ways of actually enumerating items or listing items in our website. They can be ordered or unordered, and they have different tags and a different style. An ordered list is defined with the OL tag, like this. They also have opening and closing tags because they will have content. And unordered lists are defined with the UL tag. So that is a trick to remember them: O from ordered and U from unordered. That's a way to remember them. That's what I personally use to remember them. We have unordered lists and we have ordered lists. And lists also have another type of element that they contain that is very unique, a list item. Let's start with an unordered list and let's compare them. With an unordered list, the items will not be in any specific order, so they will just have like bullet points or generic identifiers instead of numbers or letters because they will not be in a sequence. Inside the list, we need to include list items, 1 list item per element in the list. List items are marked by the LI tag, and we need to have an opening and a closing tag because inside them we will be writing the actual list items. So let's say that we want to create a list of colors: blue, green, and brown. This will be an unordered list of 3 colors. Let's see this in the browser. We see blue, green, and brown. You will see it as much smaller, of course, because I have this zoomed in to 500% so you can see it better. But in reality, you will see this like this at 100%, and you can increase the font size with CSS later on in the presentation. So going back to 500%, we see that it has these little bullet points because we don't have a particular sequence. You can also customize these, but that is the topic of a more advanced video. Please let me know if you would like to learn this, and I will be glad to create a video for this. Great, so this is an unordered list, but if we have an ordered list, let's just change the U to O. Let's see what happens in the browser. Now we do see 1, 2, 3. Now we have the list items in a sequence, and we can also customize how they are represented. And now let's go to text format. With HTML, you have limited options for text format, but we do have some helpful tags that you can use. However, please note that we usually use CSS to style our text in web development. So in HTML, we usually have a few use cases for these tags. When you want your text to be displayed as bold and important, when it has a specific importance within the context of the website, then you should mark it as strong. This will also be helpful for screen readers. It will know that the text is important, so it will emphasize that text when it's reading it out loud with the strong tag. However, if you want the text to be bold, but it's not as important, so it doesn't have to be highlighted when in any way, then you just use the B tag over here. B from bold, and remember strong is also important. And then we also find italics. Italics is defined with an I tag if you want italic text, and if you want emphasized text, then you should use EM, this tag over here. You just surround the text in the paragraph that you want to modify with these opening and closing tags, and it will have the format that you are expecting. We also have many other tags for text format. For example, here we can have a strike through in the text if we use the del from delete, the delete element. We have sub as a sub index here, and if we want the text to be smaller relative to the current font size, we can use the small tag. This is helpful for copyright at on the footer of the website, but you have many of them, and you can find more information about them in the documentation, and I may be covering some of them in the channel. There are many more to choose from. Let's say that I want to apply some special format to the word learning. I have many different options. Let's see this. If I want the text to be bold, but I don't want it to have a special importance, then I just use the B tag. And here you can see that it is actually being displayed in a bolder font. But if I want this to have a higher importance, like strong, I don't see any visual changes, but this will be different for screen readers, for example, and for SEO purposes, because they will know that this word has a special or more important meaning. Now, if I want the text to be in italics, I would use the I tag, and you can see how it changed. And if I want this to be emphasized, I just use EM. You will not see any changes visually, but it is something similar to strong and bold. If I want the text to be strike through, I can use del, like this. You can see that it is being crossed out, or it has a strike through in the word. So we have many different options, there are many to choose from, but we usually handle this type of text style in the CSS file of our project. What we usually do is that we use a span element like this. Spans are super helpful because we can select them with CSS, and they basically create a way for us to mark this text in between and apply some style to it, or apply some transformation to it with CSS or with JavaScript. Spans can also be very helpful. They are inline elements, so they actually stay in the same line. We won't see any changes in the paragraph, but we will be able to select this individually through the span. Great, so that is HTML. I hope you liked the course and that you found it helpful. If you like this course, please consider subscribing to my channel. It really means a lot to me and it helps a lot. Also, stay tuned for new courses. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day and welcome to the world of web development.